Alright guys, Blind here again with another sample attempt at a story of survival. And the one I found for us today is probably even better than my pilot one. In this story, I hit everybody's worst case scenario, getting lost to sea. Now, if you're lost in land, even in the winter, you have some advantages provided you're not on a frozen tundra. You can get trees, you can get game if you're lucky, if you know what you're doing. But at sea, if your boat capsizes and you're stuck at sea, you're pretty much in trouble because you can't drink salt water and your days are fairly limited because of that fact that you can't drink salt water and you can't resupply because unless you have a fishing pole, you're pretty screwed. And then during the daytime, you're exposed to the sun and all those elements. Being lost adrift at sea is just like, in my case, a personal nightmare because let's face it, you can't go anywhere. You're just drifting. You don't have any room. Whatever, it could be a piece of debris. It could be, in some cases, I've heard of stories where the Coast Guard have pulled people out of the water after drifting on a cooler top because they didn't have their life jacket on. That's how dangerous it can be. That's how extreme it can be. Just because being out at sea should be fun doesn't mean it can't be dangerous. And here's a prime example. This is a story of one, two, three guys who set off from Texas on a 23-foot catamaran. Now that's a sailing slash skiv kind of boat. It's a somewhat decent seagoing boat, and it's made obviously for fishing, which is what they were using it for. And so these guys decide they're going to go fishing. And they go fishing all day and they're having a good time. But it gets dark out and they fall asleep. So they're like, okay, let's hit the sack. Let's go down deck and go to sleep. Now, while they were sleeping, something happened. One of the bilge pumps, which are made to keep the water. Let's face it, in a boat at sea, water will always come into and out of the hull. What a bilge pump is made to do is pump the excess water off the deck and such. Now, their bilge pump failed, so their boat started filling up. Now, that is bad news right there, because if your boat's filling up with water, the inevitable thing is you're going to sink. And guess what happened to these guys? Yes, they started sinking. And when they started sinking, they weren't even aware of it because they were asleep. You see that over there? Now, it wasn't until one of the crew woke up, one of the group woke up and noticed that the floor was flooded, that the rest of them woke up and also discovered this alarming fact. Shoot. I don't like this scenario. Oh. Uh-uh. I'm gonna have to take out the skeleton. He's got a zombie friend. Okay, to heck with taking him out. More like let's just stick to the trees and evade. Now, as I was saying, so this guy wakes up and he finds his boat flooded with water. And the one guy's idea is, well, let's start up the engines and use the momentum of the boat itself to just dump all the water off the back end. That's a decent idea. I mean, it's better than doing nothing. I mean, I don't know too much about boats, so I can't say that it wouldn't have worked. Can't say that it didn't work, but obviously it didn't. The boat, for some reason or another, capsized before they could even proceed to fire up the engines and get out an SOS. Now, that right there is pretty much a death sentence. If you can't get out a mayday call when you're starting to sink, you're really behind the ball now. So these guys are now on a boat that's capsized, and they scramble to get on top of the capsized boat so they don't, drown in this water. And none of them have a PFD on because, let's face it, they were just sleeping. Who goes from sleeping to wearing a... Ooh, there's water. That's a village, isn't it? No, that's a desert temple. I think, yeah, it is a desert temple. Let's get in there. Oh, come on, not now. My game is just freezing for some reason. Anyways, so these guys decide, let's climb on top of the upturned hall, which makes sense because, let's face it, you got nowhere else to go. Climbing up the upturned hall is really the only option. Now, I think I'm going to turn this into my base camp. Yeah, there's a pressure plate there, so this is what we got to do. Got to avoid the pressure plate. So, while I deal with this, I'll continue telling my story. Don't worry, I intend to put this all back, because it would look a lot cooler with this than without it. So now, they're adrift on the bottom of their upturned boat. And they start doing the smart things, like they manage to dive back into the boat as it's filling up with water, and they get very important things out of it. Like they get a don't worry, I'm gonna put all this back. Minus the TNT, of course. They get a, this is what they get for food, sorry. They get a box, a bag of, 2 bags of chips, sorry, 2 bags of chips, and a packet of gum. And they got about 2 gallons of contaminated, ooh, diamonds, contaminated water, because the engines, oh my goodness, the engines had flooded the ship, contaminating it. It's the drinking water they had. So what do? They also find, I think it's a piece of canvas. I don't fully understand what they do use, but I believe it's a piece of canvas they use to rig up some shade for their boat. Now this is a huge deal in itself, because in the ocean, at sea, there is no shade. In the Gulf of Mexico, there is no shade whatsoever to be had. So, if you don't have any protection from the sun, dehydration will happen, and it will happen very quickly. So what these guys did right there, by making themselves their own shade, well, it probably is the reason they survived for so long, in spite of the fact they didn't have much in the way of food, or really anything to help them along. Just that simple fact they had made shade helped slow their dehydration. And this is the Gulf of Mexico, so temperatures were reaching some serious extremes here. You're talking like 100 some odd degrees. So you're dealing with temperatures in the hundreds of degrees. And yeah, they have shelter, but it's not really enough, is it, on its own? I came from over there. So what do they have to do? Well, they have to keep themselves cool. And by doing this, and to do this, they did this another smart thing, which was I hate doing this. By hating doing this, I hate eating raw meat, but they take turns jumping in and swimming in the water, because the water's 80 degrees, the ocean's 100 degrees, the air's 100 degrees. At least there's a 20-degree difference. It helps cool them down. The evaporation also helps cool them down. Now, a day after floating around, one of the lost men's wife noticed, hey, my husband isn't back from the fishing trip yet. And so she calls the Coast Guard and says, my husband and his friends were supposed to be fishing by this one oil rig. I haven't heard from them yet. I'm growing concerned. Can you send somebody out there to look for them? And the Coast Guard, obviously, since it's their job to go look for people who get lost at sea, say yes. And they go out. Now, they search an area approximately 86,000 miles. That's bigger than the state of Utah, to give you some perspective, people. So they search this area bigger than the state of Utah, and they don't find anything. So they presume, and by anything I mean absolutely nothing. No life jackets, no debris. So they assume the ship went down with all souls on board. And they keep looking for a while, but with that knowledge in their mind, obviously, they're not holding their breath or keeping their hopes up that somebody's miraculously just going to appear. Now, while this is going on, about day or 3 or 4, these poor souls, they have their situation go from bad to worse. Because at this point, they're out of their tainted water, which was tainted with gasoline, and it was making them violently ill. They've wasted all their food. They've eaten up all their food. I mean, 2 packs of chips and gum is not going to last you very long. And now they're left with this, pretty much the prospects of just drifting in the ocean until they die on top of their upside down raft. And a helicopter goes by. So obviously, helicopters, good news for them. But they had already fired off all their flares because this wasn't the first helicopter that's gone by. And they used a lot of their flares up on the first few days, believing that just by keeping the light at night, they'd help themselves get found sooner. Fortunately, because they had their boat upside down and they had rigged up a piece of canvas, they weren't visible because the canvas itself was blue. So these poor guys get passed over by another rescue helicopter, and they are stuck drifting now without water. But again, to prevent dehydration, they keep hopping in the ocean and swimming, but their boat, their upside down catamaran, has drifted into, I don't want to know what the technical term is for them, but it was basically a pack of jellyfish. So these poor souls are getting stung by jellyfish for their troubles. And as if that's not enough, they're out of water. And so they keep going into the salt water to, keep themselves from dying of dehydration, but it's burning the jellyfish stings, and it's got to hurt like hell, one can only imagine. But they keep doing it, and on day 5, I believe he said it was, day 5, the one guy notices something in the water, and he goes, wait a second, and he grabs it, and he realizes, holy crud, this is in fact a piece to the wash-off tank. Now, I don't know exactly what a wash-off tank is, but I do believe it's where they, it's a tank they use to help clean their catch. So that in itself is fairly useful and significant in the fact that now they have a new source of water. So these guys, don't mind me, just hang on a second here. Grab this hose and they realize, oh crud, we use this hose to filter out the slime skim the slime out from the top of the fish tank. And in spite of the fact that obviously this is very gross tasting water, they start sucking on this hose because there's water in there. So they give it a pull, and the one guy describes drinking this water as drinking molasses on a cool day. It was wonderful, and the feeling of it going throughout his whole entire body completely rejuvenated him. I'll take his word for it because obviously I wasn't there. Now, these poor souls have at this point been lost at sea for 8 days. 8 days adrift, sucking out a little water from a wash tank that's underneath the water line, and being stung by jellyfish, burned and blistered by the sun, running out of food, they're starting to they've been hallucinating, and they see this other boat coming up on the horizon, and they're like, "Oh my goodness!" So they start yelling and waving, and one of the guys had a fire extinguisher, which he just lets off a huge blast. Why he kept the fire extinguisher, I don't know, but you know what? It was a very good use of it, and it made a very good signal. The other boat turned out to be another group of guys going to fish by the oil rigs to do some, deep sea fishing. And they spotted these guys and they rescued them. They brought them back to shore, and complete surprise to everybody, these three people managed to survive like 9.5 some odd days alone at sea, and it's just an example of how amazing it is. The guy who rescued them, you know, radioed into the Coast Guard, "Hey, I got these three guys on a capsized boat," and the Coast Guard were like, "Oh shit, those are the guys we're looking for." On the way to driving his vessel over to a Coast Guard cutter, which is like it's the Coast Guard's version of it's a big ship, okay? He cooked them he cooked them a steak dinner, which all the survivors were like, "Oh my goodness, this is wonderful." They proceeded to eat it, and then they proceeded to throw it up because their bodies had not had so much, food and stuff in them for so long. It was just crazy. But these people made it, and they survived basically because they did some smart things. They kept their cool. They didn't panic. They didn't drink the ocean water, which is also in itself a huge deal. Because if you drink the ocean water, you're pretty much condemning yourself. Ocean water has salt in it. Salt will not keep you hydrated. It will dehydrate you faster. So therefore, by drinking salt water, what you're really doing is dehydrating yourself to the point where you're going to start hallucinating from lack of water. And you'll also get violently ill. Now, you ask me, that's not a nice way to go. So, these guys did the right thing in my opinion, and they are alive today because they didn't drink the salt water, they didn't panic. Don't get me wrong, I imagine every one of them had a moment where they were like, "We're never going to get rescued," or a moment of lack of hope, but regardless of that, they still kept going, which is the key factor here. I believe if you ever find yourself in a scenario where it's life and death, the difference between life and death will not come down to one thing. It's a multitude of things. You can do the right moves and you can do the wrong moves. You can do all the right moves and still die. You can do all the wrong things and still live. It just depends on what you do and when you do it. For example, you can go out in the Alaska wild and survive just by having a head on your shoulder and realizing when it's time to find shelter and what would be a decent shelter and what wouldn't be. Like, if you can realize that it's not a good idea to take shelter underneath a cave under a waterfall because it's too wet and too windy, when it's the winter, you're doing a lot better than the guy who has the equipment but lacks the knowledge. So you guys get what I'm saying here? I'm basically saying that you need to have a brain. You can't just have the equipment and assume that because you have the equipment you're going to survive. That's not the case. If you believe that, you're probably going to die because you're just being too damn stupid and too damn cocky. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please tell me what you think. Be honest. I will produce more videos if you like these. If not, that's cool. I probably won't do these too often because let's face it, it's kind of pain in the butt, and I really don't like hardcore that much, to be completely honest with you guys, because I don't like the fact that I now have 5 emeralds and 8 diamonds, and if I die, I'm gonna lose them. Now, I have an idea for another series, which I'm probably also going to use this very map for. So don't be surprised if the next time you see me working here, and if I ever do another one, a survival story, that this area looks different. But with that note, thank you guys for watching, and